Ruling Spain until his death, Fransisco Franco's legacy had a long-standing consequence for Spain in the eyes of detractors and admirers. The Spanish Civil War cost 500,000 lives in a devastating conflict between Republicans and Nationalists. It also helmed the rise of one of the world's most famous dictators. Welcome to Bizarre History. Today we look at Fransisco Franco, Caudillo of Spain. Born Fransisco Franco Bahamonde on the 4th of December 1892, his life began in El Ferro, a quiet little town on the northern coastline of Spain. Though his initial school years were spent in a Catholic-run private school, Franco always wanted to follow in his father's footsteps of serving in the Navy. At 12, he pursued his dream by joining a naval academy, yet this was short-lived due to funding problems of the government at the time. Though the Navy wasn't possible for Franco, he turned to the military and soon enrolled in an infantry academy. Franco would graduate after 3 years spent in Toledo, though his grades were nothing to celebrate. Franco's military career was soon on the rise. His first posting was a short stint in his hometown of El Ferro. This was followed by leaving then for Spanish-controlled Morocco to fight insurgents at a post he had volunteered for. It was a long stay for the young Francisco. He arrived in 1912 and would spend the best part of 14 years there. This post was the making of Franco's military CV. Not only was he the recipient of medal recognition and awards, but he also took a gunshot to the stomach and survived to tell the tale. Not less significant than any military accomplishment, Franco met his wife during this period. In 1923, Franco would marry Carmen Polo. By 33 years old, Fransisco Franco was the youngest general of any army on the entire continent. His next post was as the head of a recently developed Zaragoza military academy. The Spain that Franco came of age in was already ruled by a dictatorship. From 1923 to 1930, King Alfonso VIII governed through military rule. His world was to be turned upside down in the municipal election of 1931. The king was ousted, and progressive Republicans came to power, making the start of what was labeled the Second Republic of Spain. The Republicans were no shrinking violets looking for incremental adjustments. Their reforms were critical and sweeping. Major institutes were altered, and the Republicans made reductions in military power, Catholic Church influence, and the sway of wealthy landowners. Franco, an out-and-out nationalist, did not take to the Republicans and was publicly critical of their policies. In response, Franco was reposted back to El Ferro, and his military academy was closed for business. While violence was on the rise between nationalists and Republicans, Franco was brought back into military action following the election victories of center-right candidates. In 1934, Franco led troops in Asturias to suppress a revolt of leftists in a bloody conflict, leaving thousands arrested and nearly 4,000 dead. A year later, Franco was made the Army's chief of staff. He was among the many military figures who began the planning of a coup after further leftist election victories in February of 1936. Whether through precaution or outright distrust, Franco soon found himself banished to the remotest military post of Tenerife. Franco is alleged to have not entirely been on board with the coup that his colleagues had been planning, yet this would take a major change. In July 1936, important politician and leading monarchist José Calvo Sotelo was assassinated. He was murdered by the bodyguard of Indalecio Prieto, leader of Spain's Socialist Worker Party. This would be the spark to light the fire of the Civil War. Just 5 days after the assassination, the military leaders launched their planned coup, and they soon had control of the majority of western Spain. Franco took the responsibility of bringing Spanish troops stationed in Morocco back to Spanish shores. The military also received assistance in arms and aid from Hitler's Germany and Mussolini's Italy, soon Axis powers, in World War II. Franco was instrumental in assuring these contacts and backing. The Civil War of Spain was in full force with Fransisco Franco as Generalissimo, the named leader of rebel nationalist forces. In a war littered with numerous factions, Franco was quick and astute in gearing up a solid base of support. His maneuver of guaranteeing support from the Catholic Church meant he could unify fascists and monarchist factions. Most importantly, he disassembled any other political organizations. The bloodshed that followed was extraordinary and far-reaching. Franco's forces included fascist militias and most infamously murdered thousands of Republicans in Badajoz. The taking of political prisoners was also done by the thousands, as were their murders. The leftist Republicans, despite having the aid of the Soviet Union, could not stop the rot of infighting or the advancing nationalists. The Basque lands and Asturias fell in 1937, following the bombing by both German and Italian support of the nationalists. 1939 would mark nationalist victory. Once Barcelona had fallen and Madrid had surrendered, the war was over. The victory of the nationalist rebels left Franco de facto ruler. He turned from leader of the armed forces to leader of the entire country. The transformation into Fransisco Spain included him taking the title of Caudillo. This dated term belonged to centuries previous. While directly translating to leader, it heavily insulates the leader in question who wields military power. Fransisco Spain was fled nearly instantly by many Republicans, and those who stayed were left in the hands of military tribunals. Any Republicans after the conflict had little more status than political prisoners in waiting. Fransisco boasted in the 1940s he had as many as 26,000 political prisoners locked up. The military tribunals sentenced Spanish citizens to their deaths. Change for the nation was wholesale. International isolation meant a self-sufficient economic policy that would backfire over time. All unions were barred from meeting. Any Catalan and Basque language and names faced a ban in public life. Catholicism became the only accepted religion in Spanish life. Most intrusive to the lives of everyday citizens, Franco policed his population with secret police spying on them. Franco's cult of personality demanded loyalty from all institutes under one-party rule. During his time as Caudillo, he kept Spain overwhelmingly neutral during World War II. Yet the backing and association of fascist Italy and Nazi Germany harmed the international reputation of Spain considerably. Franco committed no troops to efforts in World War II, but did promote the efforts of volunteers from Spain. Fransisco Spain also kept its waters open to German submarines during the conflict. Division Azul, the Blue Division, comprising around 18,000 volunteers, was sanctioned by Hitler in 1941. Until they were sent home in 1944, it's estimated some 45,000 Spaniards volunteered to fight alongside Axis powers on the Eastern Front. To what should be no surprise, the Spanish presence in the fighting did not go unnoticed by the Soviet premier. So incensed was Stalin that he took it to the Potsdam Conference in 1945, demanding that Russia be allowed to retaliate directly through Allied forces. Lucky for Franco and Spain, both Churchill and Truman convinced Stalin otherwise and settled for a trade embargo. Following the consequences of this, international isolation followed Spain after the close of World War II. Allied powers increasingly fell under Cold War formations of NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Under President Eisenhower, the U.S. made diplomatic ties with Franco's Spain in 1953. In a trade of military and economic assistance, the U.S. was granted the construction of a naval base and 3 further air bases on Spanish soil. The conditions of the Cold War ironically warmed up Spain's international standing, though they would have to wait until after Franco to join NATO. Franco and the consequences of his fascist rule took a toll not only on Spain, but also on the national sentiment toward his reign. As he grew older, public life was something Franco would increasingly avoid. The older he got, the less capable he was of the non-stop running of a government. In his later years, you'd be more likely to see Fransisco Franco hunting or fishing than committing to public affairs. In the last decade or so of Fransisco Spain, the controlling grip on the population was lessened. Economic reform, relaxing of press and police controls, as well as increased tourism, showed a different future. In November 1975, at the age of 82, Fransisco Franco died following a long battle with Parkinson's disease. In an opportunity to get back to democracy, all major parties in Spain signed the Pact of Forgetting. It gave a chance to leave the Civil War and its sins behind. The agreement expired at the turn of the millennium. A poll in 2006 showed around two-thirds of the Spanish population would want an investigation into the Civil War. In 1969, Franco had picked his successor to be the King of Spain. His choice was King Alfonso VIII's grandson, Prince Juan Carlos. The imperial settlement in which Fransisco Spain was run had faded in the public eyes by the time Juan Carlos took the throne. His stance was an immediate change from the past and was a leading voice in the call for all political parties to be recognized under the law. Under Juan Carlos's reign, the first democratic elections after Franco's dictatorship took place in June 1977. Spain has remained a democracy to this day. If you want more on the Spanish Civil War, be it nationalist or Republican stories, let us know in the comments section. Like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Thanks for watching Bizarre History. See you next time.